It's so hard to figure people out. And not just because they're hard to figure out, it's also because of us. As a result of a number of what we call cognitive biases, we can misinterpret other people's behavior in very profound and powerful ways. Today on the Change Your Minds podcast, I'm going to explain to you why is it that we get people wrong from our point of view? What are the mistakes we make in our brain that cause us to make erroneous conclusions about what the person is saying, what they mean, or even who they are? We're going to walk through ideas like social comparison bias. We're going to talk about in-group bias. We're going to look at the false consensus effect and lots more to understand exactly why we make mistakes when we try to read other people. This is going to be so helpful and so useful in all areas of life, from business to your relationships. I'm telling you, this is one to check out. See you inside. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to be talking about why we're so bad at reading other people. Now, on a previous episode, How to Read Anyone, I walk you through some of the most important strategies that you can use to be a lot better at reading people. And those skills still will work for you. They'll really help you. So make sure you check that episode out. But in this particular episode, I want to walk through what we call cognitive biases again. And cognitive biases are a deviation that we make from rational judgment based upon some habitual heuristics, shortcuts that we have in our mind that allow us to be able to reach conclusions more quickly. So a number of biases can sometimes help us, but more often than not can lead us down the wrong sort of path when we're trying to understand what's going on. In previous episodes, we've talked about how these affect our decisions, how they affect our memories, or even how they affect how we perceive the world works. Well, today we're going to be spending all our time focusing exclusively on how it affects the way in which we interpret other people's behavior and how we read other people and why we make the mistakes that we make. So I'm going to walk you through a number of these different biases, give you examples, so that when you're speaking to people, regardless of the situation you find yourself in, you know what to look out for, and you're able to make it so that you're using the skills we talked about on the other episode, How to Read Anyone Better, and you're able to use them without allowing the biases to infect or affect how you interpret what's going on. This is going to be really useful. And we're going to start with what we call social comparison bias. And social comparison bias is the tendency to evaluate one's abilities, achievements, and attributes by comparing oneself to others. This is popularized and studied by Leon Festinger in the 1950s. He's a well-known psychologist, and he proposed that people have an inherent drive to evaluate themselves, and most of the time we do this by comparing ourselves with other people as well. So often you can be doing a fitness program, for example, and you can immediately see other people are killing it and doing so much better than you, and immediately you don't feel nearly as good as a result. I'm currently training for the marathon, and as I trained for the marathon, I'm like, oh, I feel so good. And then all of a sudden you go running in Central Park, and I'm telling you, if you ever try to run in Central Park on a Saturday or Sunday morning, the amount of people that are running there, and they all look insanely fit. A lot of the guys have like, they're no t-shirt on and they're running, and there's like a 12 pack, and they've got like huge shoulders, and they're running at like 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they've got like perfect chisel features, and all the women there, perfect bodies as well. I mean, it's just, you're running along, doing circles around Central Park, and you're being like outrun by everyone, and they're younger, and it just can't help but make you feel like, what am I doing? Anyway, that's an example of the social comparison bias and why we oftentimes allow that to negatively impact the way in which we perceive it, because we're looking at everyone else and we're comparing ourselves to them, but more often than not, they're comparing themselves to us as well. So as I'm running, probably other people are running past me going, oh, look at him. He looks like he's running, right? And look at him. He looks Irish, which I would love to be Irish. Oh, I don't feel so good because I'm not Irish. And whatever else that they'd be jealous of. I'm sure there's lots that they'd be jealous. We also might feel, for example, demotivated about our diet because other people seem to achieve results faster. Someone else is losing weight faster than you. Once again, that can demotivate us. We need to recognize when that's happening and nip it in the bud, because that's not accurate. It's not useful. Different people have different metabolisms. Some people lose weight really quickly, but then struggle after a while to keep losing it. Other people take forever to lose it, but once they do, they tend to be good. different horses for different courses. And when we stop comparing ourselves to other people, we become a lot better at making more sound judgments about it. In terms of relationships, sometimes we can feel envious because we compare our relationship with someone else. So you look on social media and you see these people and they go, oh, we're so happy, we love each other so much, oh, we're the best friends, we're this, we're that, we're that. Like it's the perfect little, oh, I love you more, no, I love you more, no, I love. And on Valentine's Day and on the round, and there's always like this sick of over the top, like, oh, and then you know, you might be looking at yourself going, oh, why doesn't me and my partner ever say that to us? Now you probably know, you might have the relationship with your partner that if you ever did start to go, I love you so much, you're the greatest thing in the world. They go, are you okay? Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you talking like this? I'm starting to get scared. Do you need medication? So different relationships are different and different people show love in different ways. So if we try to compare ourselves with the Instagram we're on now, you know, it's very possible those two people could be online. They could be like, oh, I love you so much. And offline, they could be, I hate you so much. You're the most annoying person. As soon as the camera turns on, they're like, oh, you're the love of my life. So it's very possible that that is true. So we need to recognize that. Or we might think to ourselves, oh, Mike is such a socialite. He's always out. He's always raving. He's always like going to all these extreme parties. Why am I not? I have no social life. Well, in that case, probably more true. Not about Mike. I'm sure Mike's not doing it. Are you, Mike?
Yeah, 50-50.
50-50, okay. But he's not going to 100% of parties. And the fact that I'm not going to a party, it's probably because I'm not a big fan of parties. My point is that oftentimes we think to ourselves, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, right? The reality is we shouldn't be looking at that grass. We should be just focusing. Do not covet your neighbor's grass. We should just focus on our own grass. And I'm not talking, that's not a euphemism for drugs. Another example of social comparison theory would be feeling less successful by comparing your career progress to that of your colleagues or peers. Again, depends. There's a lot of factors in there that explain why we're at the stage we're at. And it's not helpful for us to just feel bad. If we're going to compare ourselves and it actually motivates us to want to do better, great. But so often it can just make us feel bad. Or if we can't afford, for example, luxury brands that some other people that we've seen wear, then we feel we're not good enough as a result. All of those are mistakes. So we need to not immediately see other people and immediately think to ourselves, oh, I'm not good enough because they have this and I don't, right? That's what I call the snapshot effect as well. I say it's like you're just seeing the snapshot of what they want you to see, and then you're making all these ridiculous conclusions as a result of it, which just isn't helpful. The next type of effect is what we call the Forer effect, also known as the Barnum effect. And the Forer effect is our tendency to believe vague general statements as being specifically applicable to oneself. In many ways, politicians are great at this. Some self-help gurus or spiritual gurus can be quite good at this. It's like saying these like high-level, terms. If you understand who you are, you will live as to who you can be. Oh my goodness, that's so true, that's so amazing, that speaks to me. No, it doesn't. It's just a vague statement. It's just a one-liner. Clever little aphorism designed to be able to make you think that it's smart. But he demonstrated Forer. It's named after Forer because he did a classic experiment in 1948 where he explained how people accept broad general statements as something really, really meaningful. And no doubt we could still do that today. Some examples of this would be we might believe in general health advice from horoscopes. So now this is true if you're a Cancerian like I am. Apparently Cancerians are really smart, good looking, kind, wonderful, funny, amazing, extremely attractive, the best. And I think that proves that some horoscopes are based on fact and very realistic and legitimate. But then there's got an awful lot of other horoscopes, such as, pretty much anything else positive about any other horoscope. Wouldn't believe it at all. Very high level, very sort of vague. Anyone could say, yeah, that applies to me. So I think with the exception of the Cancerian stuff that I mentioned, which is obviously very spot on, I think all the rest of it is rubbish. But sometimes we'll believe it and we'll go, I should do this because my horoscope told me to or my psychic told me to. Probably not the best way to live your life. Accepting vague wellness statements from a generic health article, which you think it's relevant to your condition. So if you just, breathe, then that's going to solve all your problems. Now, breathing techniques can really help. But if you just breathe and relax and don't even think about it, then it's going to go away. Might not go away. Relationships might be you, again, use a psychic to get relationship advice. I know a lot of people have had relationships negatively impacted as a result of advice they got from a psychic. And the psychic said, oh, they're no good for you. And you make bad decisions if you believe in it too much. But once again, it's a little bit generalized, this advice. Or even from a business perspective, this can happen. We make broad business predictions from a generic report, and we accept vague motivational statements as personal guidance for business success. And this is one I do want to touch on, because so often you can go online and, let's say on LinkedIn, and someone posts something like, the key to success is to work hard, or something along the lines of communicating with empathy is the secret to great relationships. Now, maybe people need to hear that. Maybe that's not as vague, but let's say communicating nicely with people leads to better relationships. No one's looking at going, oh my goodness, I need to understand this. What do they mean by, it's one of those grandiose, of course. And whenever you see one of those statements online and you go, of course, that's necessarily not adding a lot of signal. If we talk about the metaphor, and again, I've touched on this in the mental models episode, one of the mental models, previous episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. But sometimes we give all these vague statements, in NLP, sometimes we call them artfully vague, that you can interpret in different ways. But once again, this slogan automatically becomes people's mantra, and they live by it, even though it doesn't really mean anything. And that's the problem. The next particular bias is what is known as the Semmelweis Reflex. And this is the tendency we have to reject new evidence or knowledge because it contradicts established norms or beliefs. So it's almost like the traditionalist bias. And this is named after Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, who discovered the importance of hand washing, but faced rejection from the medical community. The Semmelweis Reflex highlights resistance to new ideas. Now, Semmelweis must have been having a laugh. I think he's probably dead. I don't know. I think he must be dead because he discovered the importance of hand washing. So I'm hoping that wasn't less than 100 years ago. But he is probably laughing wherever he is now whenever COVID happened, because all of a sudden everyone was like, look, we don't know what to do. We're not even sure about masks or whatever. We're all over the shop. The one thing we know is wash your hands. It's like collectively everyone in the world is like, oh, we have to wash our hands after we go to the toilet? Really? I don't like that scenario. Let me go and get the toilet paper. Sorry, that's a callback to another episode, the last episode that we had on the podcast. So hopefully you've got that joke. But a few different examples is when we resist old traditions, rejecting new health research because it contradicts long-held beliefs that we have, or dismissing alternative medical treatments despite evidence of their effectiveness just because we want to stick to traditional. Or we might ignore new relationship advice because it contradicts what our views have always been about the right way to do things, or same what goes with parenting. Or in business, we might dismiss an innovative business strategy, again, because it conflicts with the established practices, or you might reject new innovations in a product because it differs from traditional models. Once again, the importance is to overcome this by being able to be open to new ideas and open to new perspectives as well. The next bias is what we call the projection bias. This is our tendency to assume that others share your current emotional state, thoughts, and preferences. And really, this is something that's been studied quite extensively in psychology. It's been looking at how people project their own feelings and thoughts and attitudes onto other people. Most of the time, this is inaccurate. And so, for example, one might assume that other people are equally motivated to exercise just because you are, or everyone enjoys the same health benefits from foods as you do. The amount of times people will say, you know what I think, even though they're not qualified. And they'll just give you their point of view, their perspective. They'll share with you what their experience has been. And it might not be in any way relevant to you or helpful to you or useful to you, but they'll share it. And that's because from their point of view, if it helped me, it can help you too. You might think in business, for example, that your team members are excited about his project as you are. Certainly this happens in startups, right? Startup founder, we need to remember, if you're a startup founder, you need to remember that it's very likely that people that you hire as your first sales team are not going to be as motivated about the product as you are. They're not going to be as excited. They haven't been eating, sleeping, drinking this particular product for the last year, 2 years, 5 years. So we need to recognize that and be aware of it. Also, examples might be, we might believe that another person will find a product as useful as you will. So you tell them how amazing it is. when other people give us this advice, we need to recognize that just because it works for them doesn't guarantee, it doesn't mean it won't work for us, but it doesn't mean that it will. And that's something that we need to recognize from that point of view. The next bias is a concept called reactance. And this is the tendency we have to resist or oppose what someone is trying to get us to do. And this is something that happens very early on. When we're babies, when we're toddlers, we kind of oftentimes the first word that we say is usually no, right? And that's because we're exerting our independence. When toddlers figure out that they have a sense of locus of control, they have the ability to be independent, oftentimes they'll push back whenever someone is trying to get them to do something. And it's important for us to recognize that this tendency that we have to resist what a person's trying to get us to do happens because we perceive that there's a lack of choice in the matter. So we feel that a person's trying to impede on our own freedom of choice, and as a result of that, we automatically try to respond negatively to it. This is something that was developed by Jack Brem in the 1960s. Reactance theory as it's known, and it's really, really important in understanding why we struggle to be able to persuade other people. It's not just because they might disagree with us, it's because they're already primed to disagree with us because they feel that they're trying to be manipulated by you. And so examples of this might be, we might resist dietary advice because it restricts a diet. If someone turns around to me and says, hey Owen, I know you want to lose weight, therefore I'm going to recommend you don't eat vanilla ice cream, you don't eat banoffee, and you do not under any circumstances eat caramel choo-choo, I'm probably not going to be a very receptive audience. I'm not going to turn around and go, no more caramel choo-choo. All right, that's fine. I trust you. I'm not going to trust you. You are the devil. You are Satan. And you were trying to let me fall into this horrible life where I don't get to eat my caramel choo-choo. You might also ignore medical advice because it hassles your lifestyle. You might do the opposite of what a partner suggests because you want to be able to show you're not going to tell me what to do. You might reject a company policy because again, you feel that the company is trying to dictate everything and you disagree with it, or they limit your autonomy in some way, or you might avoid a product because the marketing tactics are quite aggressive, although I'd argue that's kind of rational. If someone's really aggressive in marketing to you, it's probably a good idea to reject doing business with them, because if you even give them a sniff that you're interested, if you even respond to an email, oftentimes they'll retarget you in all sorts of crazy ways. But you get the point. Sometimes we tend to react negatively, even though necessarily the decision might be better. And it's the way in which we misinterpret the person, we immediately start to have a negative reaction to them that then causes us to sometimes make a mistake. The next bias is what we call the illusion of transparency. And this is the tendency we have to overestimate how well others can understand our emotional, internal states, thoughts, and the way in which we feel. And so the illusion of transparency was something described by psychologists Gilovich, Savitsky, and Medvec. And it demonstrates how so often we can misunderstand other people by thinking that they get us, they understand us better than they actually do. And so sometimes we think that people will be able to tell when we're in pain or discomfort, even though we're not showing any outside signs, or when we're in a bad mood, we think that people will immediately read that, or we think to ourselves that our partner can read our emotions and know, you know how this makes me feel. Well, if you haven't articulated it, how do they know? They can't read your mind. You know. I just know that you know. I don't know why I'm putting on this voice. Thinking salespeople are not interested in a product without you saying so. So think to yourself, oh, they should get it. I'm not biting it out of their hands. Therefore, they should get the message. If you've ever heard yourself say, did they not get the memo? Then that's an example of you falling prey to this sort of illusion of transparency. You think you're giving signals, but you're actually not. Sometimes in trainings, for example, I'll say, can you give me more of a response? And people will go from, I'll say, does this make sense, for them to shake their head? And they'll go from this to this. And then when I say, does it? And they'll go, yeah, as if I could notice this imperceptible, bare nod that gave me the information. Because again, we do that. Or sometimes I'll say, could you speak up? And people will speak the exact same volume, but they'll think that you can hear them more clearly. So more often than not, we tend to misperceive how other people are able to perceive us. And this is, again, the illusion of transparency. We think we're more transparent than we actually are. It's not as easy to read us. The next one is the false consensus effect. This is our tendency to overestimate how much other people share our beliefs or attitudes and behaviors. Oh, I'm sure they'll believe the same thing as me. This is not a million miles away from one that we talked about earlier, this projection bias. Whereas projection bias is a little bit more like our tendency to share that other people are feeling the same state as us. With the false consensus effect, it's more about our beliefs and attitudes, what they think in this situation. This is something that was described by Lee Ross, David Green, and Pamela House, and it really highlights how we think our opinions are held by more people than they actually are. So we might think that most people are following the same diet advice or exercise advice as us. They might think that our views of relationship roles and dynamics are more prevalent than they are. We might assume that our colleagues agree with our business decisions, or they might think that our reasons for making purchases are shared by most other people as well. So we assume, look, this is the norm, and it's not the norm, right? Might be very different to the norm, but you go, everybody knows. You've ever heard yourself saying, oh, everybody knows that this is true? Well, maybe they don't. Maybe it's just you. Maybe you don't even know. You just think. It's all possible. Next, in-group bias. And the in-group bias is the tendency we have to favor members of one's own group over those in other groups. And this is one of the most critically important of all the biases when it comes to explaining why we're so polarized. This has been extensively studied in social psychology. We tend to have more empathy with the people that are inside our group, and we tend to be a lot closer, which makes us further away from people in what we call the out group, which is in any other group but our own. And so we tend to trust people more in our in-group. We tend to trust health advice, for example, from people who share a cultural background. We tend to believe that friends or partners who belong to our social group, we're more likely to see them as smarter and more successful and more persuasive as a result. We tend to trust and value their opinions if they're in the same group as us. We tend to prefer to work with colleagues from our own department or division than, inverted commas, outsiders. Or we tend to choose brands or products that tend to be popular with our social group. So we make a lot of decisions based upon this notion that we're in the same group as all these other people. So if they're in the same group as us, we're more likely to be influenced by what they do, and vice versa. And so it's important to recognize this in-group bias. But there's also the out-group homogeneity bias. And this is the tendency we have to see members of other groups as more similar to each other than members of one's own group. And so oftentimes we might think to ourselves that I'm in this group, but other people that are in a different group than us. So let's talk politics for a second. If you're a Republican, you might see all Democrats a lot more similar than they actually are. Or if you're a Democrat, you might see Republicans as more similar than they actually are. And that's a perfect example of this particular bias. In relationships, we might think to ourselves that people from different social circles all behave differently in relationships. For example, oh, I'm sure that they all cheat on their partners. Or we might assume that employees from a different department all have the same work habits and attitudes. Oh, they're from Risk. Oh my goodness, you know what they're like. Or we might assume that all customers from a different demographic have the same product preferences. Oh, I'm sure they all eat that type of food in that particular area. These are kind of examples of sort of stereotypes that we have, but we assume that they have a lot more in common. In health, for example, we might assume that members of a different cultural group have all the same practices in health. Oh, they're from this country, they must believe in this. So we might instantly start to create more connections and more assumptions about how similar they are to each other as a result of wherever they're from or some other variable that makes them part of the outgroup. And that's another example of this particular bias. The next one is known as the Pygmalion Effect. This is the phenomenon whereby higher expectations leads to an increase in performance. This was based on a very famous study by Robert Rosenthal and Ledor Jacobson in the 1960s. It's obviously named after Pygmalion, which is the Greek myth of the person, the dude that was sculpting, and he fell in love with his own statue. Imagine falling in love with your own statue. I mean, good for you. But the statue would be pretty easy to fall in love with, I'm sure, if you're into statues. I don't know. I don't understand Pygmalion. I never have. I don't think I ever will. But anyway, this particular effect came about. A study that was done by Rosenthal and Jacobson was when they kind of took some teachers and they told the teachers that these certain students were above average in terms of intelligence, you know, a great potential or whatever. And then a year later, the students, even though that wasn't the case, the students actually really improve their intelligence. Why? The assumption is because they were treated as if they were smart by the teachers, which in turn influenced it. So some examples of this would be we might experience, from a health perspective, faster recovery because healthcare providers have higher expectations. We might improve our behavior and commitment in a relationship because our partner expects the best from us. We might exceed work performance because our boss really believes in our abilities. We might feel more satisfied with a product because the salesperson really believes and expects that it's going to help us massively. So in other words, other people's beliefs about us, about something we're doing, about a result we're going to get, can influence our belief in it as well, and therefore as a result can affect our performance too. So a very, very powerful effect there as well. And then another bias is called the backfire effect. This is a tendency or phenomenon where people hold on to their beliefs even more strongly when presented with contradicting evidence. And so backfire effect is being challenged quite a lot over recent years. So we have to weigh up the evidence to some degree. Some people would still argue it tends to fit, but then in other contexts, not so much. But some examples would be we might believe in a health myth more even when we're provided with scientific evidence that debunks it. So someone sort of points out, this happened to me, someone pointed out, like, I used to think like all I need to do is take vitamin C tablets and I'm like never going to get a cold. And then someone showed me like, well, actually, no, it doesn't work at all like that. And I was like, okay, whatever. It's a vitamin C tablet. I'm miming here. Oh, it doesn't work? A little bit of reactance there as well. You don't tell me not to take vitamin C. I mean, they weren't. They were just telling me that the statistics or science, the data doesn't show that vitamin C stops you, or vitamin C stops you from having a cold. But I still believe. Holding on to a failing business strategy more strongly when presented with data that shows that it's not actually working, or a negative market trend, being more convinced of it even though you can see that it's not working out, or believing in a product's effectiveness despite negative reviews. All of these are examples where we go against the grain. We say, statistics prove that this isn't the way. I'm not listening to statistics. I'm not listening to data. I'm not listening to fact. Don't know why you're making that sound, but sure, look, that's a possibility. Another bias is the group attribution error. And this is our tendency to assume that the characteristics or behavior of a group reflect the characteristics and behavior of the entire group. So if you're this type of person and you act like this, that must be how everyone acts. And this is one of the main reasons why stereotypes are so popular and how we overgeneralize so often. It's one of the things that's wrong with the world, if you ask me. We might assume because a person has a certain health outcome, that's representative of everybody in their social group. We assume that because one friend in a social group has certain relationship problems, that every member does. Oh, that's typical. That's always. They're all like that. The reason for this group is because, I heard this particular example, they're all the same. And as soon as we hear ourselves say they're all the same, that's an example of this group attribution error. We attribute the same qualities to every member of the group just because one person has it. We might assume from a business perspective that one customer's preference reflect the preferences of all customers. That would be a big mistake, because if you go into, for example, a burger place and you ask for a burger and you assume that everybody must want cheese on their burger. I don't want cheese on my burger. I don't want tomato on my burger. I don't want onions on my burger. I just want a plain burger. I do not want any of the other crap. So if you went along and said, oh, everybody likes cheese, no. Group attribution bias. Group attribution bias. Plain burger. Owen. You might assume that one employee's work habits reflect the habits of their entire department. Again, all of these are potential mistakes we might make when we jump to conclusions. So again, in this particular episode, we talked about the group attribution error. We looked at the backfire effect. We looked at the Pygmalion effect. We looked at the outgroup homogeneity bias. We looked at in-group bias. We looked at false consensus effect, illusion of transparency, reactance, projection bias, the Semmelweis reflex, as well as the Backfire effect, and finally, the social comparison bias. We covered a lot. But each and every one of these biases are things that can happen to us that might lead us to misinterpret other people, or in turn, misinterpret how we are responding to other people. And the more that we can recognize these biases and overcome these biases, the better we'll be at being able to communicate more effectively, and do what we need to be able to do. We'll be better at reading people, and then you can use some of the great skills from the episode on how to read people, how to read anyone, so that you can become much better with other people, regardless of what context you find yourself in. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please share, spread the word, let more people know. Give us a nice little rating or review would be wonderful. A nice little comment will go a long way. But for now, take care, be well. Check out my newsletter, owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter, and check out more of the episodes. There's one that's going to come up. Check it out. It's fun. We get to hang out more. For now, take care, be well. May the force as always be with you. And may you use what you've learned to make even better decisions when it comes to people. Bye for now.